Welcome to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Our podcast identifies issues that influence and impact the workplace and its continuing evolution, and helps answer the question on every organization's mind: how will my business be impacted? Evolving technology is changing the face of workplace law at a pace previously not contemplated, including in the area of leaves and accommodation. On this episode of We Get AI for Work, we sit down with Bryon Bass, CEO of the Disability Management Employer Coalition, or DMEC. Bryon discusses the risks and benefits employers should consider when adopting AI technologies in decision-making. Our co-host is Joe Lazzarotti, principal in the Tampa office of Jackson Lewis and co-leader of the firm's privacy, data, and cybersecurity group and the artificial intelligence group. Joe and Bryon, the question on everyone's mind today is: what are the ways organizations can leverage AI while remaining compliant with potentially competing federal and state policies? And how does that impact my business?
All right. Terrific. Thank you for that introduction. I have the pleasure of being here today on our We Get AI for Work podcast. I have the pleasure to introduce Bryon Bass, who is the CEO of the Disability Management Employer Coalition. That's a great organization that's dedicated to absence and disability professionals. So we're really thrilled to have Bryon here. We do a lot of work with his organization, had the pleasure of being with his team and a lot of absence and disability professionals about a month and a half ago or so in Columbus. And they have an upcoming conference, their annual conference in DC. So if you can make it, be sure to look at that. So it's in August. So Bryon, thanks again for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe. I appreciate it. It's great seeing you again.
Awesome. So, you really sit in an interesting spot. You work with a lot of organizations on, disability and absence issues. And I think a lot of companies are kind of thinking about how does AI affect a lot of different things. And one of those things is, how do they affect, what they're doing in their day-to-day. So I thought maybe what a lot of people are wondering about, just as an initial matter, is, what are you thinking about, and what are they thinking about in terms of how the new administration has come in, some of the changes that they're seeing, particularly at the EEOC. There was some guidance that was issued, and that guidance was pulled back. So give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, not just with respect to what's happening from an AI perspective, but we are seeing, lots of things that are being pushed out and then being pulled back and reconsidered. I think at the end of the day, though, when we take a step back and look at the information that's been coming out from the EEOC and the DOL, and that is they're still going to enforce the law the way that the law is written. So we still need to be concerned with discrimination, right? And ensuring that whatever practices we're using, whether we're using AI or any other type of technology, we need to ensure that any type of a tool is not inadvertently causing a disparate impact and causing, someone to be discriminated against. And, that's really been one of our key concerns as we think about the proliferation of AI overall and what it could do for us in the human resources space. And in particular, from a DMEC perspective, we're focused on leave, disability, accommodation, and absence management. And the DOL still has guidance out there regarding AI and some of the things that employers need to be concerned about as it relates to decision making. And they have specifically called out things like you shouldn't be using your AI tools to make eligibility determinations or final determinations as to whether or not a condition does or does not qualify under the FMLA as a serious health condition. And if you do use tools in that way, you need to ensure that they are doing the right things and they aren't making decisions that could inadvertently diminish or take away the rights that an individual has under the FMLA and other laws that the DOL is responsible for enforcing. So even though we're seeing this ebb and flow happening with guidance being published and then rescinded, the basic fundamentals of ensuring that individuals are not discriminated against, first and foremost, and then secondarily, that employees are still afforded the rights that they may have under federal law. And the other thing that we need to be concerned with is this isn't just a federal matter. We have so many states that offer leave rights as well. And the federal government may have pulled back some of the guidance from an AI perspective, but we are starting to see a huge number of laws that are being passed across the United States as it relates to AI. And some of them are specifically stating that you cannot use employee data to make decisions. And if you do, in many instances, they're also stating that you need to have the employee's consent to do that. And so I think that adds some more complexity to how you would incorporate and use AI in HR related functions, especially as those related to leave, disability, and absence management.
I'll call you on the spot a little bit here. Any predictions on the state moratorium that was proposed in the big beautiful bill? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I know the 10-year moratorium, right, is what's in the big beautiful bill. There's a lot of talk out there that may not be a legal provision that, in terms of our federalism and aspects of how things are set up and the power that states have, that it could be in the bill, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it can actually be enforced. So I suspect, as we've been seeing with many other things, that some of the states, California is where I live, being one of them, New York is where you are, that's another. I would suspect that there would be some pushback and potential lawsuits if that was tried to be enforced, to see whether or not there is legality associated with the ability to put that moratorium on. That's my prediction.
Interesting. When we were preparing for this, you mentioned that DMEC was kind of convened a little bit of a survey about some of these issues. And I'm just curious how that went, and if you can share any results, that would be, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we started what we're calling an AI think tank, if you will, late last year, where we brought together a significant number of our employer members. We also have some brokers and consultants and tech professionals, and also some service providers in the disability absence management space. And as part of that, what we wanted to understand is, of the professionals that are in this space, can you tell us what your basic understandings are of AI? How do you think AI can be incorporated into the work that we do? What are some benefits and some challenges? And what we found and what stood out in that survey overall, 130 professionals responded, mostly employers first and foremost, but only 60% of them had any basic understanding of AI. And I think that's not uncommon. I think across the board, the general populace probably doesn't have a deep understanding of AI. And in many respects, even the definition of what AI is and what AI isn't is differing. A lot of folks are seeing things from companies out there that, AI is helping with this and AI is helping with that. And frankly, it's not really AI. It's just another form of automation, and it's like rules-based, but everybody's using the AI term because that's the new shiny object that's out there, right? So part of what we're working on as a think tank is that we want to put some more finer granularity around what we're talking about when we're talking about things like AI. And so in that respect, we're talking about things like large language models and generative AI, where there's decisions that are being made based on data and other pieces of information that are out there and available. So we're really focused on that so that we can define what it is we're concerned about or should be concerned about with respect to AI in our particular space. We also asked about formalization of policies. We are starting to see more and more policies becoming part of the workplace. And we found about 30% of them had formal policies in place for using AI in employee benefits decision. And so we know there's a huge gap there in terms of the policies that are in place, and there might actually be some use of AI going on out there, and there are no policies in place, right? And we see those types of things in leave all the time. There's certain types of practices that are happening, but there may not be a policy around that supports it. So it wasn't a surprise to us to actually see that in the survey results from AI. On the flip side of all of that, there is a ton of optimism, right? So the top benefit cited was efficiency. And so 85% of the respondents really felt that AI can help streamline some of their processes. But they also flagged some major hurdles. And those are things like systems integration, compliance ambiguity. And then, of course, I talked a little bit about this earlier on, and that's the lack of transparency in how AI makes decisions. Like, what are the algorithms that are being used, and how are those algorithms being developed and defined, and then how are those that are utilizing the AI actually checking to make sure that it's doing the right things, right? So what's encouraging for us is that, there is the appetite for learning, and people want case studies from us. They want ethical guidelines, and they want some practical tools. And that's exactly what this group is building into our white paper and our upcoming AI think tank sessions. And you already mentioned our 2025 DMEC annual conference, where we have an actual session there where we're going to go into a lot more detail around the white paper itself, our findings, and we'll start to introduce some of these tools that our employer members are looking for. Things like another thing that we're seeing that we're being asked to provide is some guidance around RFPs and what types of questions should you ask your vendors or suppliers or software providers as it relates to their utilization of AI. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to help, as we have in many other areas through our more than 30-year history, to provide employers with these tools and resources they need to keep ahead of yet another emerging type of area that we need to keep our eyes on and ensure that we can get our arms around as a community.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious. One of the things I'm wondering about, particularly the folks that are at your members doing this work day to day, maybe more than most people in their organization, they're dealing with sensitive data about their colleagues. How are they viewing AI? Like, for example, AI in the context of, I'm seeing a lot more uptake of AI transcription services where note taking and collecting and analyzing and summarizing notes of meetings with employees in different contexts are being used, and it is very good in terms of doing that. Although there are some issues. I mean, I'm wondering, did anybody identify those? Was that something that you guys focused on at all in the survey?
Yeah, that's we didn't really focus on that in the survey. We kept it more broad so that we had an understanding of where people were in their thinking process, so that could help direct us on some of the initial issues, if you will, that we were going to focus on. What we know, and I'll just say this before I jump into the answering the specific question you asked, and that is, this is only the start of the work that we have to do on AI. It's going to continue to emerge. We can't boil the ocean, is what I like to say. We need to start small, and we need to start in ways that we're providing our members with the most crucial pieces of framework that they need to move forward. But we're going to continue this on beyond that. Going back to your question, we have subcommittees that are part of the team, and frequently there are topics such as that come up. And in this one in particular, there has been a lot of conversation around how do your policies internally need to have something in place that talks about how you use transcription and when it should be used and when it shouldn't be used. And I think it's interesting because I'm starting to notice some advances, if you will, in the use of AI from a transcription perspective. In so much that I'll give you an example. Copilot is the Microsoft product that is part of their Microsoft platform. It's something we're testing internally at DMEC to see how it might help us with content delivery and things of that nature. But I bring it up because in particular meetings with Copilot, you can set it up in such a way that it doesn't actually take a full transcription of the conversation that's happening and that's going on. But at the end of the meeting, you can ask it to summarize what the conversation and the discussion was. And then that allows you to take that information out, similar to what you'd do if you were typing it out, on your own or transcribing it on your own, to ensure that any of that sensitive, personal, identifiable information that may have been discussed during that meeting is not being disclosed. And what we're finding in our testing is that it's doing a fairly good job of not including that type of sensitive information, and it's providing you more broader types of transcription, if you will, or meeting minutes or amount what was discussed in the meeting itself. So I bring that up because I believe that many of the tools are starting to recognize that this is a potential issue, and they're introducing things that can be used to not eliminate, but to reduce the risk overall in capturing something that probably should not have been captured. And secondarily, the other thing you have to be concerned with is, and I'm again learning this on my own by using the tools internally here at DMEC, is you can actually restrict it in terms of the folders or the libraries of information that it goes into to source information and content. So we have separate libraries that are set up for various functions within our group, and we have a very private area which has our HR information and our payroll information and our accounting information, and we've specifically excluded that library from being accessed by our co-pilot to protect that sensitive information. So all that said, I think it's still an evolution. It's still something that's evolving, and I think we're going to continue to see those types of things that are going to come out. They're going to hopefully put in place things that can limit the risk associated with AI getting inappropriate information or information that it shouldn't have.
Yeah, it's definitely a concern. Absolutely. It's just switching gears a little bit, but I guess maybe it raises some of the same issues depending on how these tools are configured. But ever since COVID, we worked with a lot of clients that, they want to find better ways to kind of deal with remote workers in particular, not just that, but in particular remote workers. And there's these performance management and monitoring platforms that have evolved and are becoming even more popular. I'm wondering if you've looked at those and tried to think about some of the, in particular, disability issues that might arise from, if a platform might indicate an employee is not performing well, and what the reasons for that are, and whether that's, could that be an accurate or complete reflection of their performance, and how are employers kind of looking at that and dealing with that issue? I don't know if you've seen any issues arising out of that.
Well, I have some concerns about it. We're also talking about it as part of our think tank. And so I think it's important for the listeners and employers in general to take heed in this warning that I'm going to give. And that is, in this particular space, we're talking about providing accommodations for individuals that have disabilities. And when we talk about individuals that have disabilities and the type of accommodations they might need, we have individuals that have visual impairments. We have people who have inability to maybe type as well or as fast as someone else. They have difficulty with some cognition. And so there are various tools that are available that help employees with these types of challenges. My concern and my caution is that these tracking tools don't necessarily take those things into consideration. They don't know that Joe is working at home and Joe has a visual impairment, and so as a result, there are things that need to be done on the monitor. It takes a little bit longer to read things. It takes a little bit longer to go through and do editing processes. There's a lot of things that come with visual impairment. Same thing as it relates to, any type of an impairment related to your ability to type or mouse or any type of thing that we're doing to you to interface with a computer or other technology. And I haven't looked deep into these types of tracking mechanisms, but I would hope that there is something there where you can actually indicate that maybe an individual only has 25 or 30% the capacity of the general person. But I don't believe that that's there. And even if it is there, I would seriously question again, what's the algorithm? How's the algorithm being used? How is it tested? And as we all know, in the a reasonable accommodation space, you're making an individualized determination in terms of what's the right accommodation for each individual based on their own specific individualized circumstances. So it's difficult to take all of the things that an individual might be challenged with as it relates to the general population and take all of those into consideration to come up with the best way to track and monitor them. And that's not to say it's any easier if you're just doing it from a humanistic perspective. That's one of the hardest parts of our job in this space is that overall accommodation assessment and determining what might be appropriate and what might not be. And in many instances, we try things out on a trial basis to see if it's going to work. And it's a little difficult to incorporate those types of things into these tools that are monitoring keystrokes and other types of behaviors to remote workers. So I think that's going to be one area that we need to be very cautious around.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have the same thoughts. There's a lot to be considered with those tools. And kind of along those lines, one of the things that Eric Felsberg, who we missed today, he's had another engagement and he co-hosts this with me. But one of the things we try to do at the end of each podcast, particularly those with a guest, is think about governance. We think governance is a really strong piece of this. And I know we kind of talked about this a little bit, but can you share some thoughts that there's three things that you think from a governance perspective around AI. I know you talked about questions with vendors, but maybe that's one of them. But are there things that you think employers should be thinking about as they decide to basically implement a tool, an AI tool in their organization as it relates to absence and disability?
Yeah, I think one of the most important aspects is we need to ensure that there's some form of human oversight that's incorporated into the decision-making process. And so there's an interesting book that's out now called AI Snake Oil, and it's written by two individuals at the AI lab at Princeton, I believe. And it's very interesting information. And if you were to read that book and we go back and look at some of the things that have happened historically, a lot of AI is built around predictive modeling, right? And so predictive modeling has a bad name in its own right, because prediction is based on large sets of data that come in, and unfortunately, predictive modeling has discriminated in many instances because it takes into account or it sees data that generally you see happening within like lower socioeconomic classes or older populations and things of that nature. And one of the examples that they use is, an insurer or an insurance company who was making determinations or decisions on their rates and what the rate increases were going to be, for their customers. And what they found with some of these predictive models is that it was disparate treatment for older insured folks who, from a car insurance perspective, and also those in the Black community. And so they found in that regard that the prediction was wrong. It was like inappropriately causing these higher rates for those two groups of people. And so the cautionary tale there is there was a huge reliance on this prediction, and there really wasn't a lot of human oversight into it to understand why it came to that prediction. And then once if they would have understood it at the very beginning, they probably would have made a different decision and they wouldn't have increased the rates. But I bring that up because human oversight is a really critical part of the work that we do in this space, because we're making decisions on whether someone is going to receive wage replacement benefits, whether someone's going to receive job protection, whether someone's going to receive accommodation in the workplace, et cetera. And without that human oversight to find flaws in any decision making that's not being made by a human, then there's such a significant risk of doing the wrong thing. And one of the things that we have been talking about in our group is perhaps we need to come up with an agreement across the board that as it relates to a denial decision, either denial for any type of benefit or job protection, things of that nature, that always requires a human oversight component to ensure that nothing was missed in the final analysis. And so those are some of the guardrails, if you will, that we're talking about putting in place to help with the industry and ensure that we're not inadvertently discriminating or making the wrong decisions for individuals. I talked a little bit about that RFP toolkit with scoring rubrics that can help employers vet AI vendors, ask the right questions about the logic, transparency, audibility, and their compliance testing. And we're also hearing that they want some case study libraries. For example, let's talk about where AI has failed and where it's helped, because we know that there are going to be situations that come up where it's being utilized or we try to use it and it may not be working as well as we would like it to have. And so there needs to be an opportunity for us to share that collectively so that we're aware of these failures as they exist, but then also where is it helping? Where are the things where it's doing well? And things like summarizing information, like medical information and medical records that might be coming in that might be an area where it might do a fairly good job. And so that might be an area where you might see an increased amount of adoption there. But in those regards, those really are a couple of what I call the framework associated with what we're putting together. But we're also talking about things like, what do policies look like? How should you be training your teams on this? How you should be using pilot programs, testing things in more low risk areas before you scale it. And, one of the things that I've been saying in this meeting is, hey, let's not race into the adoption of this technology because the tech is shiny, right? We need to do it because it works, but it works in a responsible way.
Yeah, that's perfect. And those are a lot of really great ideas. I think we really appreciate, Bryon, you joining us. I think this is going to be a really good podcast for a lot of folks that are in the absence and disability space. And again, if anybody listening, DMEC is a great organization. You definitely should try to check out that annual conference. And they provide a lot of really helpful resources. So, Bryon, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us again. As you know, if you have any questions, want to send them to us, or you can pass them along to Bryon and get his thoughts. If you have any questions, our email address is ai@jacksonlewis.com, ai@jacksonlewis.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Focused solely on workplace issues, it is our job to help organizations develop proactive strategies, strong policies, and business-oriented solutions to cultivate a workforce that is engaged and stable. Please tune into our next program, where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. We Get Work is available to stream and subscribe on your streaming platform of choice, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. For more information on today's topic, our presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com. As a reminder, this material is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor does it create a client-lawyer relationship between Jackson Lewis and any recipient.